We start with those extraordinary events at the White House, with Donald Trump introducing sweeping new tariffs on all imports into the United States. President Trump claimed America had been ripped off by foreigners for decades. Well, the US stock markets have dropped sharply in early trading following falls in markets in Europe and in Asia. Governments and businesses around the world are taking stock. Retaliation is already being planned in many capitals. So let's start this hour with a look at the headline figures announced. There'll be a universal baseline tariff of 10% on all imports coming in to the US. That's the rate that will be imposed on the UK. The European Union has been hit with a higher 20% tariff. Donald Trump imposed an additional 34% tariff on China. That's on top of the 20% already announced. Well, he signed that executive order in the White House Rose Garden and described it as Liberation Day.
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. American steelworkers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen. We have a lot of them here with us today. They really suffered gravely. They watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. We had an American dream that you don't hear so much about. You did 4 years ago. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore.
Well, let's get immediate reaction both from the US and the UK. I'm joined by Katrina Perry. She's there at the White House, and Harry Farley's at Westminster. Katrina, to you first of all. We were playing that clip. You were there in the White House and heard it firsthand. It was extraordinary to hear a US president talk about his trading partner, his allies, in the words he chose.
Indeed, and we've seen the anger in the responses from many of those allies. Just the shock at what President Trump unveiled yesterday. Many economists and commentators have said it's the worst of the worst case scenarios that were being contemplated in advance of that. But nevertheless, the Trump administration, the president himself, they're all ploughing on this morning, selling what a good idea this is, how they see it to be beneficial for American consumers, for the American economy. Just in the last few moments, the Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rollins, has been behind me here talking to members of the media, again saying it's a great day, it's really exciting, how grateful she is for President Trump's leadership, and an acknowledgement again that there may be pain in the short term. And my colleagues here were shouting at her, well, what does short term mean? And she didn't appear to give an answer to that, because that's the big question, of course, on everyone's mind in this country and around the world is, how long will these tariffs last? Will they be pulled back at all? And the inevitable price rises and inflation that will be seen here, how long will that pain be before the advantages that President Trump is envisaging actually take effect?
Yes, and they are openly talking now about price rises for the ordinary American consumer. You had the former Vice President Mike Pence tweet it was going to cost the average American family $3,500 per year. Rand Paul, a Republican senator, talking about how tariffs in the past had decimated the Republican Party, both in 1890 and the 1930s. There is worry even amongst Republican ranks.
Absolutely. I mean, tariffs, the way they've been levied, the vast majority of those percentages will be passed on to the American consumer. So essentially, it's a tax on consumers. And Mike Pence in his tweet described it as the biggest tax hike, peacetime tax hike ever in US history. And we've seen a similar sentiment from many economists today that there's never been a tax hike like this on consumers. And that is not what the Republican Party, conservatives traditionally stood for. They're the party of lowering taxes, of getting rid of this kind of thing. And that's what's really stumped many within the Republican Party, most of whom I'll say are keeping their counsel quiet publicly at this point, although privately they are really grumbling about what this is going to mean. You mentioned Senator Rand Paul. He joined with 3 other senators on Capitol Hill, Senator McConnell, Murkowski and Collins, in joining with the Democratic Senator Tim Kaine, who had put forward a bill to do away with these state of emergency tariffs that the President has put on Canada. Now, that bill passed through the Senate. It's unlikely to get through the House of Representatives, but it does show us that first kind of sign of people prepared to say, stop, this is not what we want.
Katrina, there at the White House, thanks once again. Let's go to Harry Farley. And Harry, 10% tariffs introduced here on the UK. There is supposed to be a special relationship. Take me through the government strategy, because it seems to be a twin strategy. They keep saying we have to keep calm and try to negotiate a wider trade deal, but also they are making contingencies, aren't they?
They certainly are, and there's been a toughening of language we've heard from the government, even in the course of today, in response to those 10% tariffs. This morning there was a hint of a sigh of relief, perhaps, from Downing Street. They said that the fact that the UK has got 10% tariffs rather than, in comparison to, say, the EU with 20%, that has vindicated their approach of essentially trying to build a relationship with Donald Trump, trying to talk about a wider economic deal. But having said that, later today, the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, he announced a consultation with businesses as to what a possible retaliation could look like, what that impact that might have on them. And he's published just in the last few hours this afternoon a 417-page document of all the US goods that could, and it is a could at this stage, could face a retaliatory tariffs, and it ranges everything from children's toys to cattle and just about everything in between. About a quarter of the total US imports into the UK are, I suppose, up for discussion as to whether the UK does retaliate with these tariffs. Having said that, the government is very much saying that that is not the path it wants to go down. It says it is disappointed with the tariffs, and it emphasises that talks about that economic deal are ongoing. I think that is where the focus now is in Westminster. Can the UK reach this sort of deal that maybe mitigates, maybe removes entirely these tariffs? Jonathan Reynolds, again, the Business Secretary, was asked this morning, and he said that the reports that that deal is waiting for Donald Trump to sign it off are not inaccurate.
That is the hope, clearly, Harry. Just a really brief answer on this. How long is the government prepared to give those talks to just keep going before they actually implement these contingencies?
It's a good question. The deadline for businesses submitting their responses to this consultation about possible tariffs is the 1st of May. So I don't think we'll hear anything about any retaliation before then.
All right, Harry Farley there at Westminster, thanks very much. We'll have more reaction from around the world shortly. I'll take you actually and show you the live pictures. Still, we have a feed of Mark Carney speaking just in the last few minutes. He has announced that Canada is imposing a 25% tariff on some US auto imports. That, of course, a direct reflection and a response to the 25% car tariffs that Donald Trump imposed only last week or so. So that, the latest from Mark Carney. We continue to watch and listen to that news conference. We'll bring you the significant lines as they come into us, and we'll have more world reaction in a moment. But I want to spend the next few minutes talking about the UK car industry, which could be heavily impacted by the new tariffs. As I was talking about the Canada car imports, already we've had the announcement about 25% car tariffs here on the UK. That was announced last week. So let's speak to Mike Hawes, who's the Chief Executive of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, and welcome here to the programme. Your general thoughts on where we are. We had those 25% tariffs on cars last week and steel as well. Now another 10%. Your headline thought on this?
Well, kind of like the government, deeply disappointing. I mean, these are punitive tariffs. The 25% was obviously on car imports into the US. 10%, fortunately, is not on top of that, but it does widen the number of goods, parts, components that are now eligible for additional taxation. This will put a lot of pressure on UK manufacturing, but it will also, as your report said, raise costs for US consumers. So there is no winner in this outcome.
Well, Donald Trump thinks he can be the winner. Just give me an idea of the size of exports, the type of exports, where you're most worried about.
Well, our exports to the US predominantly come from our premium manufacturers, sports car, luxuries. If you think Bentley, Rolls-Royce, Jaguar, Land Rover, McLaren, we've got a tremendous stable of these brands. It's worth over 7 billion a year, and it probably accounts for about 15–16% of our exports. Europe is still our biggest export market. But for those brands I've just described, it's the US that's their biggest market. For some of them, 30–40%, some of them over 50% of their production goes to the US. So they were the ones most exposed to these tariffs.
I know this is really early days, but is there a potential here of real harm, real damage when it comes to job numbers here in the car sector?
Well, as you say, it's too early to say. I think the first thing to do, and the focus has to be to try and get some sort of economic deal that would reduce that 25% additional tariff for UK products. And clearly we saw the mood music from a couple of weeks ago when Keir Starmer was over there. I know negotiations continue over the last few days to try and seek that deal, to try and relieve some of that pressure. That's first and foremost. Secondly, what is the impact here? Well, the impact in terms of consumer demand in America will be pretty quick, because they will see that the impact of these prices on cars that are currently on boats that are going over there. So what we're looking there for is, is there any way of having sort of temporary support for the industry to get you to that stage where maybe a deal can be secured and those tariffs paused. Let's explore that avenue before looking at other possible consequences.
Really brief final thought. So you're happy with the government response, which is keep calm, keep negotiating, consult with various sectors here in the UK, as opposed to going full Carney?
Well, that's a good expression. I think that, for the UK, and Canada has a different relationship. It's right on the doorstep, and it's much more integrated within the automotive supply chain. We're obviously produced here, but there's no likelihood of manufacturers here setting up plants in the US. They're too small. So let's negotiate, and then if that doesn't work, then see what the possible other outcomes can be.
Michael, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us here live on BBC News. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure.